I'm going to talk just a little introduction about the campaign, so to put things in context and the general concerns, and then the rest of the presentation really focuses on the sustainability side. We had a public meeting, Waltham Forest Saver NHS, a local health campaign, had a public online meeting in July, and out of that called for a big community campaign to ensure that the new hospital that we're going to have built at Whips is the hospital that the community needs. Out of that, a lot of people expressed interest, and an organisation has been formed from it called Action for Whips. But also some people specifically expressed an interest in the sustainability side of things. So we formed a sort of subgroup of the Action for Whips, specifically on sustainability, and Sam's part of that. Obviously one of the really big concerns, which I'm sure Eva's talked about, is the fact that the new hospital is proposed to have actually fewer beds, 51 fewer beds, built with 51 fewer beds than on average have been occupied, despite the fact we have a very fast growing population. And it's justified on the basis of plans in the community to provide care closer to the home, which they say will reduce admissions and length of stay, and also changes within the hospital, like changes to surgery, so there's more day surgery and things like that. Obviously, we have major concerns over the fact that they're saying the reduction in the number of people needing hospital will be achieved by having more care packages for people, more support workers, better access to GPs, but instead of actually being based on real local data, it's based on comparative, being compared with other comparator sites, so-called. Okay, so next slide is, just to outline of where we are at the moment with the hospital being rebuilt. The government has just recently endorsed the strategic outline case, and the trust have published a summary on their website. So if you just do a search for Barts Health Future Whips, their front page has got a link to their summary if you want to read it yourself, and plus there's other things on there. So the basic timetable is 2020 to 21, like now. They're developing what's called the outline business case, which is basically much more detailed, and it will include the design of the hospital, the proposed design of the hospital, and therefore the cost of it as well. And also they're setting about now, they've actually organised the demolition of the old nurses' home, which is their preferred site for building the new hospital, because it can be built in one go without any disruption, or without having to demolish part of the existing hospital, sort of to do it. And then 2021 to 22, they'll be developing the full business case, which has got all the details and costings and things. And by autumn 2022, they reckon they can start building if all goes to plan, depending if it's approved. And then they think it'll be finished, if all goes to plan, in 4 years, 2026. And then after that, then they'll be looking at developing the housing in the area, because part of the whole plan that they have is to use the 18-hectare site of Whips Cross to sell for housing. They did say in the yesterday in the AGM that half the housing would be affordable housing, and they consider it for housing for staff. However, of course, the question is, what is affordable housing, and how affordable is affordable housing? But anyway, so it's like part of the new hospital is going to sit within a whole new development, basically. So in terms of sustainability, that presents opportunities and problems as well. So the architect-led design team has now been appointed and announced, and it's a company called Ryder, and the sustainability partners and engineering partners are a company called Hoa Lee. and their name is actually quite big in terms of the UK Green Building Council and developing zero carbon standards and things that they've been doing. So they are up there in the sustainability front line, I believe. Now, just in terms of our involvement, we're both Waltham Forest Saver NHS and an organisation called Green at Barts Health, which is health staff at Barts who are particularly passionate about sustainability, and I'm involved with them. But all commented on the specification for the tender, and one of the things we wanted to put in there was much more than BREEAM Excellent, which they already had in there, but we want to aim for zero carbon, aim for Whipps Cross and the whole site to be an exemplar sustainable hospital site. Okay, so I'm not an expert in building. I'm an occupational therapist and I have done a master's in health economics. But me, as part of Green at Barts, we collated what information we could and what we could learn from the whole issue of what a sustainable hospital building might be and might involve. So first question is, why is it so important to have a sustainable hospital? As I'm sure everybody knows, climate change, we've got to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, and we are well off that mark, and we are threatened with very catastrophic impacts if we don't reach that. Buildings create 49% of the annual UK carbon emissions, or they are through building, through their use and through their being built. And building lots of building professional organisations are saying that all new buildings have to be net zero carbon by 2030, which is less than 10 years away. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. A fourth reason is do no harm. So we're healthcare, we're providing healthcare. So one of the fundamental principles of healthcare professionals is do no harm. So therefore, a new hospital must not add to air pollution. And 36,000 deaths, early deaths, have been attributed to air pollution in the UK. So it's a major health issue. Final reason is a well-designed hospital will be really good for the well-being of both the patients who need to be cared for there and treated, and also for the health staff, for the visitors, for everybody who uses it. So basically, good design for well-being is good for the planet and for people. And it ties in very closely with sustainability, although there are some potential conflicts. So one of the first things I think we discovered is that actually there's a really vibrant, strong move amongst building professionals, the built environment professionals, towards zero carbon and towards sustainability. So these are just some examples of the organisations. That kind of reddy orange sun one there. I watched a video of a conference from UK architects declare a climate and biodiversity emergency. It was really powerful. They're talking about things like, should we refuse to work for a client who doesn't want to make things sustainable? So what is net zero carbon? It's a word that gets bandied about quite a lot, but what's it actually mean? Well, basically there's various definitions, but one is that building does not add to global warming carbon emissions, presumably and other emissions. And one of the things that's a strong concept now is that you need to look at something called whole life carbon. And that means the carbon that's actually emitted during the process of construction, and the carbon that's emitted during the running of it with heating, etc., and the demolition, and also maintenance along the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the construction phase in a minute, but what's interesting is that nearly half the life carbon of a modern building comes from the construction phase. Yeah, so from the emissions during the construction phase. So that would be counted like the excavation, the making of the products that are used for the building, the transporting, and the actual construction itself. And I think a really, really important principle to grasp is that our carbon, environment, and human costs, it's ours. If we build a hospital here, that's our responsibility for the carbon, the environment, and the human costs, even if actually the carbon emissions occur the other side of the world. So this picture on the right is from India in Andhra Pradesh, and these amazing mountains that are incredibly fertile because they have bauxite in the soil. Now, bauxite is a raw material for aluminium, and like people are able to get 2 crops a year because the streams are always running because of the huge fertility of the soil and the trees holding that water in. However, the hot surfaces are being scraped and destroyed, and there's massive production and carbon emissions going on while they're smelting the aluminium in that area, and that's actually devastating the communities and the environment. So it's really important, this issue of what's called embodied carbon. We need to preserve our resources, like on the same theme. We need to replace our economy, which is currently take, use, dump, with a circular economy. And in terms of building, that might mean use recycled materials. So, for example, in relation to what I've just been talking about and the extraction of materials for raw aluminium, recycled aluminium uses only 5% of the emissions of processing raw aluminium, and has far less toxic emissions. So, and I read somewhere that they reckon there's enough aluminium floating around in tin cans and all sorts of things in waste to actually serve all our needs currently in the world, if it was all being recycled. And it is very recyclable. It retains its qualities when you recycle it. So use recycled materials. Repurpose buildings rather than building new. Use low carbon materials such as natural materials. Or there are also alternatives to concrete now, which are being developed, which have slightly less carbon than the standard cement used there. And build to last and build for flexibility. So an immediate thing relevant to Whipps Cross is, and that we've raised this, and I think that it's going to be done, I've heard, is that this is the picture down below is the old nurses' home. Anybody knows Whipps Cross will know that old building. Massive amount of Victorian bricks there. So those bricks need to be reused, either reused in part of the building process or maybe making a lovely walled garden, or sold on to be reused. I believe they say they're going to do that. So the shape and the orientation of a building are really key in determining how effective it's going to be in being a zero carbon, low carbon building, the amount of heating it's going to need, the amount of energy it's going to need to cool it, and the positions of the windows and the nature of the windows, of course, are highly relevant in terms of that. And you know, what we want is windows positioned to bring in the warmth of the sun, but also potentially shaded so they don't get too hot. And to bring in natural light. And the more natural light you have, less energy you need to heat, but also the far better it is for those who are actually in the building, be they workers or patients. So basically minimizing energy needed to run the building will not only save on carbon, but of course save on running costs. And these are 2 examples I've got up here on the slide of 2 hospitals that achieved a very high standard of sustainability in terms of low carbon. The top is the Royal Adelaide Hospital in Australia, and that achieved a 4 Green Star hospital as built rating. So that's measured once the hospital is actually running, not just in its plans and concepts. And another is not quite built yet, I don't think, but it's in Germany, in Frankfurt, and it's the first passive house hospital. And passive house basically means that you need very little energy to run it, because the way it's designed, it almost uses the energy from the heat that's generated within it by other things like people being in it or equipment used. So that all has to be determined at this early stage. So it's really important that we get it right. They get it right at this stage. And then the fabric, of course, is important. And everybody knows about insulation. Insulation will reduce the amount of heating needed and keeping the coolth and stuff. But what do you use for that insulation? So the picture on the left, the standard polyurethane foam embodies 46 times the CO2 of mineral wool, which is the one in the middle, the picture in the middle, which is made of all glass fiber, and which can be made of recycled glass, but also then natural insulation, be it paper, wood, sheep's wool, actually sequesters carbon. It holds carbon in because carbon is embodied in it. And also it's far, far better for the health of the occupants. For example, like sheep's wool absorbs moisture and releases it and so it can keep a really nice even moisture level in the environment. Moving on to heat and power. So renewable energy, this is based on recommendations from the London Energy Transformation Initiative, which has produced in this year, the beginning of this year, a really useful, practical, in-depth guide as to how you can build to zero carbon. They say you need renewable energy on site and off site. So for example, loads of solar panels to generate renewable energy, and also then energy that's bought from the energy supplier, from the grid. There needs to be a long-term contract with an energy supplier that is fully renewable. Heating and cooling needs to be from fossil-free source. So, for example, the current gas-fired combined heat and power system that Whipps Cross Hospital has, though progressive in its time, would not actually be suitable for zero carbon. And also there's the whole issue of emissions as well, unless we can get a gas system that is hydro, but that's not on the grid at the moment. And in terms of actually producing the heat, the best technology, it seems at the moment, is ground source and air source heat pumps. And it's probably best to get a combination of them, because one works better in winter, one works better in summer. So an example of what they've achieved is in Enfield, up the road from here. And they have recently installed the largest shared ground source heat pump array. And once it came into action, the residents of the tower blocks found a 30 to 50% reduction in their energy bills, and 773 tons less carbon emissions being produced. So one of the advantages and the potential real advantages and opportunities of the fact that you've got a whole site development, not just Whipps Cross, is in the power, sharing of power. We could have a whole site microgrid maybe. These such things have been developed in Oxford. There's a huge project in Oxford which won a big grant, where the local council, housing and the providers combined to actually, and they run their own grid, and so they can use everybody's the electricity that's generated from their roofs or from whatever to feed into a grid for the whole community. Heat recovery could be shared. You could even out the grid demand. So maybe the hospital needs more power during the day, houses need more power in the evening when people have come home from work. And the battery storage has always been an issue with locally generated power, but the technology is definitely advancing on that with flow batteries. So I'm going to move on to health and well-being, which I think personally is really, really important that we make sure that is to a very high standard. And just some of the research shows that patients, this was some quite seminal research back in 1984, showed that patients who had the same operation as other patients, but they had a bedside window looking out on moving trees blowing in the wind, actually were healed a day earlier than patients whose view was to a brick wall outside their window. And they needed less painkillers and they had less complications. So it has a very real health benefit. And then in terms of your work environment, office workers who worked near a window, who sat near a window, had a nice view outside, slept on average 46 minutes longer and better. And those without showed poorer vitality, poorer sleep, and generally poorer health. And the World Green Building Council research into offices and well-being and buildings and efficiency recommend from that, based on that research, you need to maximize natural daylight, maximize natural ventilation, enable user control. So you don't just kind of walk into a room and the light goes on, or you don't have no control over the heating. It should be much more localized. You need biodiversity is being recognized as something that's very important. And nature, access to nature is important. And also active traveling encouraged. So good staircases that are easy to use and encourage people to use stairs as opposed to lifts if they're able. And also social space for meeting is important. Interestingly, in my research, I found that the NHS building notes, which govern how NHS buildings should be, you know, different aspects of it, like theatres, should be built. They actually say that theatres should have natural daylight. So they should have windows if possible. And if they can't have windows, they should have a window across the corridor coming in with natural light coming into the theatres, and definitely the restroom there should have natural windows, because otherwise they point out that people in the winter could be working hard and never see daylight for 5 or 6 days. And finally, and that's this sort of picture on the top right, inclusive design and ergonomic design. In the original proposal for the specifications, they had forgotten about inclusive design, and Wolf and Forrest, they've just got that in there. And that means, like, designers consider people with very variable needs and abilities, be it sight, physical, mental, whatever. And then ergonomic design, so things are designed as well and easy to use as possible. So for example, a big thing I would want is ceiling track hoists, and that saves a huge amount of effort for staff in their daily work, as well as wide enough doorways and all that kind of thing. But that's a whole nother area. Nature, healing nature, nature outside, inside the hospital, in atria, on balconies, there's huge potential. But I think gardens are really, really important. They need to be accessible to the hospital. They need to be near the areas, the canteens, near the waiting areas, so people can just come out easily. They need to be accessible for people to go through who have limited mobility and in wheelchairs. And there's interesting American site on gardens, and they talk about healing nature of gardens and need to be meandering, have little different areas. And you know, there's huge potential. You could maybe have an outdoor therapy area. I think it's really important that the community is involved, for example, in designing the gardens, maybe in even running some. Some junior doctors have come up with saying we need allotments in the area. And there's an organisation called NHS Forest, which might help with planting trees. These are some of the concerns that I think we might want to discuss. Is there going to be enough space around the hospital, etc.? But I think we'll move on to the next slide, which is the final slide, to discuss that. So this is the current kind of illustrative plan for where the hospital is going to be. So the blue is the proposed new hospital, and that's on the site of the old nurses' home. Above it there is the old building, and they're going to preserve some of that to keep the sort of the historical building. Obviously, it'll get converted into flats. And then to the right of the blue building, the little blue hatched area they're talking about is an area for other health buildings. And then all the pink stuff is new buildings for housing. And then there's a multi-storey car park. And that's the kind of orange square that one of them is an orange square that's under the short blue square. and then there's another one to the right of that. So, like, one of the concerns is, to me, looking at that, is first of all, I'm glad they haven't got a monolithic one block of a building. At least they've got it in an H kind of shape, which will let more natural light in to more of the areas. But there's very, very little space around it, very little green space around it to me. The area at the top is where currently the elderly mental health unit is, and they're planning to send them away, demolish it and turn that into a green area, I think. That's what I heard anyway. So we can discuss this more, but action, it's our hospital, and we must be involved throughout, not just in the planning stage, but throughout, because there's many a slip between the planning stage and the building where things you thought you've achieved and agreed suddenly disappear because of costs. There's going to be online meetings about the hospital run by the Trust. Waltham Forest is hosting one on October the 15th. Redbridge is hosting one on October the 29th. And I am trying to plan a meeting for the community with the sustainability partners, the HOLE professionals. I've got one planned for Green at Barts at the moment for the Friday, that's next Friday. And we're not quite sure whether it would be better to open that up to people from the community. We don't know if that would be possible or not, but it might be possible. But otherwise, we want to look for a date where we can actually have a meeting on the sustainability with the sustainability guys for people like, Sarah and people like our sustainability sub action group. Okay, so that's it. I will stop sharing.